All right. So for the Phillips curve, all right, Phillips tried to provide a relationship that exists between wage rates and unemployment. That's what Phillips did. Phillips tried to provide a relationship between wage rates, okay, and unemployment. So what Philip did was very simple. Philip took the wage rate, okay, for US economy for a period. When we check the subsequent slides, we will see, when we check the next slides, we will see the period that he actually took that particular exchange rate, wage rate data. So he took the wage rate data for that period, all right, as well as the unemployment rate for that period. And then he decided to plot the graph for the two. And what did he find out? He found out that there was an inverse relationship between the wage rates, okay, as well as the unemployment rate for that period, okay? And the wage rate he did was the growth rate in wages as against the unemployment rate, okay? The growth rate in wages. And that tells you, of course, that it is what? Changes in wage rates over time. And he did that with the unemployment rate. That was his original analysis. That was what he did. And then he concluded that there will always be an inverse relationship between the growth rate in wage, all right, with the unemployment rate. So what that implies is that when money wage rate increases, remember, when I was discussing the Keynesian and classical macroeconomics, the IADS, I told you we have the money wage, which is the nominal wage rate, and the real wage rate. Remember that the real wage rate is the quantity, what money can actually buy, the quantity of goods and services that can actually be what? Be purchased, okay? That is the what? The real wage. And remember I told you that in the real wage, the employer and the employee, they are majorly concerned about that real wage and not just the nominal wage or the money wage. So, but Phillips did not consider the real wage. What Phillips considered was the money wage, which is just the nominal wage everybody, they pay everybody. So the average nominal wage paid, he considered the growth rate in it, and then he found a negative relationship. Now, remember again or recall that I told you that we have the short-run aggregate supply curve simply because of what? The relationship between money wage and what? Inflation. We have the short-run aggregate supply curve simply because of the relationship between what? Money wage rate and what? Inflation. And you remember I told you that through the money wage, all right, through the money wage, we can have increases in price or a decline in prices of goods and services through the money wage and through the money wage in that ADAS. And that tells you that increases in prices, okay, is an incentive to either increase or decline your money wage. Invariably, again, we can also say increases in money wage or a decline in money wage is also an incentive, all right, to either increase prices or decline or decrease what prices. That tells you that once you develop a relationship in money wage rate can also be translated to what? To inflation, general prices of goods and what? And services, okay? Now, this is the Phillips curve. This is the graph of the Phillips curve. that shows the relationship between what? The growth rate in what? Money wage rate and unemployment. You can see from that graph, it is what? Inversely what? Related, okay? And then I decided to plot the graph for Nigeria, all right, to show the relationship between inflation this time around and unemployment rate. Inflation rate, the growth rate in prices of goods and services. From my ADAS, I have also established or shown that there will always be what? A one-on-one relationship between what? Inflation and what? And wage rates. For Nigeria, you can see that graph between first quarter 2015 and the second quarter 2020. You can see that the Phillips curve does not hold for the case of Nigeria. All right. So for Nigeria, what you can see is that the relationship between inflation and unemployment rate is positive. That means the Phillips curve does not hold in Nigeria within this period I have examined, okay? Now, let's look at the extension of the Phillips curve, because this is where that is very important. Traditionally, of course, you know, Phillips curve have inverse relationship, wage rates and growth rate in wage rate and unemployment. They all have inverse what? Relationship. That's Phillips curve. But let's look at the extensions of the Phillips curve, all right, with respect to inflation and what? Employment. Danborg, all right, used US data between 1951 and 1961. Okay, that's 11 years. And Don Bosche and Fisher used same US for 1961 to 1969. That's 10 years. Ackley did his own for 1955 to 1969. Glay did his own between 1961 and 1970. All of them find the Phillips curve relationship is consistent with the US data only in the short run. Only in the short run. You can see those periods that were considered. They all span between the period of 10 years, 5 years, 11 years, okay? However, all right, in the long run, they found that Phillips curve have a positive relationship between inflation and rate of employment. So what I just did simply for Nigeria is not something new. It's not something we start crying, shouting, Nigeria is Nigeria, and that's Nigeria for you. It's Nigeria for you. No. These people are verified. Short run, Phillips held, but in the long run, it did not hold. Okay? Therefore, they now identified two principal factors that can be responsible. The first one is the demand pull factors that causes increases in the growth rate of wage. Remember, when I'm talking about increases in the growth rate of wage, it can also translate to increases in inflation. So growth rate in wage and inflation rate can be used interchangeably. When you get to year 4, it will be segregated. You will see it when you get to year 4. You will see that Phillips equation. They will derive it for you in year 4. Okay, but now I can use the growth rate in inflation and the growth rate in wage rate and inflation rate. I can use two of them interchangeably. All right. So two factors are considered. One, we have the demand pull factors. All right. And what did Phillips say? Phillips said during demand pull inflation, remember, when you have demand pull factors, that talks about demand pull inflation. That talks about when you have increases in demand for goods and services. And that tells you definitely that there must have been some stimulative policies, maybe monetary or fiscal policy, that stimulated that increases in what? Aggregate demand for goods and services. So when people are putting pressure, demanding for goods and services, leads to demand pull inflation. All right. That demand will result to demand for labor. Because people are demanding for goods, producers does not have any option but to ask for what? People to be engaged. Demand for labor will increase. And that will cause an increase in prices. This will give firms incentive to increase their production. So, what does that tell you? That tells you that during demand pull inflation, demand increases. Because of the increase in demand, pressure is placed on labor demand. And when pressure is placed on labor demand, firms will engage more labor. When firms engage more labor, that will be an incentive to increase what? Production. What has happened? Inflation has increased and unemployment has declined. So he argued that when the demand for labor is very high, you have few people that are unemployed, of course. Okay? Once you have few people that are unemployed, employers will always bid wage rates to go up rapidly. And because of that, each of the firm and industry will continue to be tempted to offer a little wage above that is prevailing, a little wage above, a little wage above, a little wage above. That a little wage above the industry wage, that will cause an increase in the growth rate of wage and invariably causes increases in what? Prices. That is the genesis of demand pull inflation. Remember, you have two types of inflation: cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. That is the genesis of that demand pull factors, demand pull inflation. Okay? So when I ask you to explain demand pull inflation, don't come here and start telling me it's inflation that's occurring when demand for goods and services are increasing. No, you must establish that relationship as Phillips has postulated, showing the relationship between inflation, demand for labor, okay, instigating increases in growth rate of wage that will now lead to increase in prices. And when there's that demand for labor, unemployment will decline. Okay. Then two conclusions are drawn from this particular analysis that I've shown. One, unemployment rate and wage rate are inversely related, confirming Phillips curve. What caused it? Demand pull factors. That means aggregate demand, you see, because Phillips is a classicalist, of course, and they will always be against demand side policies, okay, which is the monetary and fiscal policy. So they are trying to tell you that aggregate demand side policies you are instigating is only creating increases in wage rates and prices, okay? The second thing we'll draw is that there's an upward movement in wage rate. The upward movement in wage rate is rapid and is quick during inflation. Upward movement in wage rates is rapid and quick during inflation. But the downward adjustment is gradual. This confirms to the rigidity as defined by Keynes that we discussed 2 weeks ago. Wage rigidity. You know, one thing you have to understand is that macroeconomics is one. Macroeconomics is one. Though the topics are divided into 10, 5, 8, they all talk about one thing. They are growing from the other. So this synchronization is very important. So upward movement in wage rate is rapid, but the downward adjustment is gradual. Even sometimes it's sticky. Okay? That makes the Phillips curve equation not to be linear. That makes it to be non-linear. And if you have done maths in your year 2 or year 3, you must have done, I talk about the hyperbolic functions. You must have done hyperbolic functions, functions that will just rise, rapidly rising, but is slow in declining. Example is your total productivity curve in your micro. Total productivity curve is an hyperbolic function. It increases rapidly and it declines gradually. That is the same similar way of the Phillips curve. That's why you see the Phillips curve that they drew. You see the way it is. Okay. So that when I tell you what or explain the non-linear curve nature of the Phillips curve, don't go and start telling me stories. So very simple, because when you are seeing your questions in one line, that's why people say is a wicked lecturer or is this one stubborn, that his questions are more. No, it's a simple thing that tests your understanding of the concept. So if I tell you, explain why the Phillips curve is non-linear, don't start telling me it's from the data. It's the result that is from the data. That is what Phillips curve said. Those are the things people be writing. Okay, it's because of that relationship, that demand pull factors between the inflation, demand for labor, causing increases, upward increase, very steep in wage rates. However, for wage rates to decline is gradual. Sometimes it's sticky during deflation. So as price is increasing, okay, there will be rapid increase in wage rate. But for wage rate to decline, when prices are declining, that becomes difficult. That makes the what? Phillips curve to be non-linear. The second factor is the wage push factors. Okay, this one is not caused by aggregate demand increasing. No. Okay, you remember that cost push inflation is caused by increases in the cost of production, factors of production. Remember, we have capital and labor. Those are the two factors of production. So remember, in this analysis, we are considering capital to be constant. Of course, I've told you at the beginning of our lecture that capital is constant. So under this analysis, when there are increases in other autonomous factors, okay, in the labor market, that will make labor unions to demand for higher wages. And when they demand for that higher wages, it is in excess of the increase in their labor productivity. Remember that the classicalist model for the labor market is that for you to actually demand for increase in wage, it must be commensurate to your marginal productivity of labor. I drew it last 2 weeks. That's your demand for labor curve. When I drew it, when I say wage is equal to MPL, meaning your wage rate you are charging, you are demanding for, must be equivalent to your marginal productivity of labor. So if you break new grounds, if you add new things, you demand for more labor, for more wage. This is applicable to consulting. If you're in a consulting firm and you're able to write proposals that win new grants, that win projects for you, and if initially you manage 5 projects in a year, but that year you're managing 7, 9 projects, your marginal productivity of labor has increased. You should demand for a higher wage. Okay, but when you have autonomous demand by labor unions, they cause market distortions. Labor union causes market distortions. When labor unions wake up to now ask for increase in wage that is above their labor productivity, this will naturally cause wages to go up. Remember, if they have efficient bargaining power, wage will actually go up because the union have that power to push up the wages. Their demand for wage increase does not commensurate to increase in labor productivity. Okay, it doesn't. So when somebody tells you, it's a time for you to review my salary, you begin to ask yourself, what extra contribution have you made? If none, you shouldn't. But because of labor union, they will force that increase in wage. Okay? Again, periods of low unemployment. Once there's unemployment, all right, that is a sign of buoyant product market and high profits, of course. When there's low unemployment, activities are booming. We have buoyancy within the economy. Okay? Product market, within the product market, and you have high profits. Employers are willing and able to pay higher wages okay? That will cause a fast and upward movement in wages and decrease in unemployment. Once you are in the buoyant period during boom, profits are high, employers are willing to pay higher wage. It will lead to an upward movement in wages, okay? And causes a decrease in unemployment. On the contrary, when unemployment is very high and profits are low, labor unions are constrained. They don't have the bargaining power to demand for higher wages because unemployment is low, it's high. Nobody is even employed. So labor union cannot demand for higher wages. And employers, on the other end, will resist paying higher wages because you are not producing any new thing for me. So with high rate of unemployment, wages tend to decline. This relationship produces Phillips curve. So the factors behind Phillips curve are the demand pull factors coming from aggregate demand side to the wage push factors coming from the supply side, the labor union activities. So that is why we have types of inflation: demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. The first factor is the demand pull factor. The second factor is the cost push factor. All right. Let's now look at Phillips curve, inflation, unemployment trade-off, and policy implications. So this curve is just the Phillips curve, which is inverse. The question there is, each time you are pursuing output growth and your objective as a pursuing output growth, you are reducing unemployment, that objective will result into increase in inflation. That is why most demand side policies are inflation driven. That is why each time you try to bring up expansionary fiscal policy or monetary policy, okay, trying to create jobs, it will lead to increases in prices. That's it. So last year that the federal government was trying to bring up palliative measures just to correct the economy from the global pandemic, as they are pumping in those billions of naira. Imagine, Minister of Finance last week said over 500 billion has been spent for palliatives. As those monies are coming into the system, it will be fueling inflation. It's natural from the Phillips curve. So know that there will always be a trade-off between your inflation and unemployment. There will always be. That is why the objective of macroeconomics is price and stabilization. No, output growth and price stabilization. That is the objective of macroeconomics. That should be the first thing they will teach you in your year 4. Price stabilization and output growth. Those are the two objectives of macroeconomics. As you are pursuing one, the other will always be affected. As you are pursuing output growth, price stabilization will be affected. As you are pursuing price stabilization, output will be affected. That is it. From this Phillips curve, that is the policy implication. So we have modifications in the Phillips curve. People came up to discover that Phillips curve in the long run is upward sloping and not inverse. Okay? They now conclude that the Phillips curve is a short-run phenomenon. You extensively deal with this in your year 4. They conclude that Phillips curve is a short-run phenomenon. Okay? They trace the inverse relationship between unemployment rate and wage rates that existed during a period between 1861 and 1930. That's 52 years. Okay? 52 years. They show the evidence of Phillips curve holds in the short run. But in the long run, the Phillips curve keeps shifting downward. They therefore concluded that there is no existence of Phillips curve in the long run, or the relationship is weak. You will extensively deal with this in your year 4. That led to the long run Phillips curve by Friedman, and he now developed his theory of natural rate of unemployment. Okay, that was why Friedman now said, even if Phillips curve should hold in the long run, the unemployment existing there is the long run unemployment, is the natural rate of unemployment. So Phillips curve said, Milton Friedman, in adjusting Phillips curve, came up and said, in the long run, that long run you are seeing, there is no relationship between wage rate and unemployment. Why? That means when wage rate is increasing, unemployment does not change. It is very steep. Unemployment doesn't change. Simply because the unemployment we are having there is the long run unemployment, is the natural rate of unemployment. And that is the graph explaining that. So the long run Phillips curve is vertical, while the short run Phillips curve is downward sloping from left to right. But that long run Phillips curve in the long run, the unemployment that exists there is not related to inflation. So wage rates will be rising, unemployment will change, because the unemployment we have at that long run period is the natural rate of what? Unemployment. Okay, that is the note explaining that particular relationship. All right, and then we also have the Eckstein-Brinner's Phillips curve, and they conform to the long run Phillips curve that says there is no relationship between, there's no trade-off between unemployment and inflation rates in the long run. Okay, and even if it exists, it is beyond the critical rate of unemployment, which is the full rate of unemployment. So what rate of unemployment is the natural rate of unemployment then? We have different people that came up. Gordon, 1986, for US, found 6% in 1980s. In the early 60s, they put the boundary between 4 to 5%. Okay. In the 1960s also, for France, Germany, and UK, the natural rate of unemployment was 1% and 2%. Okay. 1% in France, between 1% and 2% for France, Germany, and UK. In later years, they found that this natural rate of unemployment for those countries rose between 6 and 12%. Okay. The variability of the natural rate of unemployment makes many economists doubt the validity of the concept. It's not stable. That's why I told unemployment is time-bound. I explained at the beginning, the dynamics in it. Because of that changes, it's not stable. Between a period, it can be 3. Now, I think now it's 3% now, 2 to 3% now. That makes them to doubt the validity of the concept. And the concept of natural rate of unemployment continues to be a controversial issue. Policy dilemma. What is desirable? Inflation or unemployment? That's a question you need to answer. What is desirable? Inflation or unemployment? Should we pursue increases in prices? Let it be increasing gradually. While unemployment is low, at least people are engaged in work. People are doing work. People are doing one thing or the other. Or should we pursue a fall in inflation not to occur while unemployment is high? That is a question I leave you to answer. Thank you. Any question? Any question?
Plenty.
You have plenty questions. Oh, sorry. I might just be able to take one. Please, I'll send the slide on the I'll send the slide on the LMS. All right. So please study it very well. I can take questions later. I was meant to understand that we might have a class on Thursday by 10 to 12. So I'll communicate to Ore sent me the message, and